Yeah, I think we should be starting now. Right.
Okay, you want to kick things off?
I think we are already quite good move in the chat box, so I think we just start moving on right away our presentations. Yeah.
I think
Okay.
we have to inform some of the participants to join Bami's session.
Oh yeah. Yeah,
Yes.
yeah, yeah. I will just go back to origin audio again and give me 1 minute. Just 1 minute. Yeah. Right. ဟုတ်ဟိုအားလုံးပဲမင်္ဂလာပါခင်ဗျဆိုတော့လေကျွန်တော်တို့ဒီနေ့ session ကကျွန်တော်တို့ English လိုမျိုး training ပေးမဲ့trainer တွေပေါ့နော်ဆိုတော့ဒီအခုတက်ရောက်လာတဲ့participant တွေအနေနဲ့ကလေခင်ဗျဆရာတို့ဆရာမတို့အနေနဲ့ကကျွန်တော်တို့ interpretation ပေါ့နော် translation လုပ်ထားပါတယ်ခင်ဗျဆိုတော့ translation ကဒီ interpretation ဆိုတဲ့ icon ရှိရပေါ့နော်အခု Zoom ရဲ့အောက်ဖက်မှာ interpretation ကိုသွားပြီးတော့ English ကိုနှိပ်ရင်အခု trainer က direct ပြောနေတဲ့အင်္ဂလိပ်ကနေနားထောင်လို့ရတယ်ပေါ့နော်ဒါမှမဟုတ်ပဲကျွန်တော်တို့မြန်မာ Burmese ဆိုတဲ့ဟာကိုနှိပ်တယ်ဆိုရင်ကျွန်တော်တို့ translate လုပ်နေတဲ့ Burmese translation ကိုမြန်မာ translation ကိုနားထောင်လို့ရတယ်ပေါ့နော်ဆိုတော့ကိုကြိုက်တဲ့ function ကိုရွေးပြီးတော့ကျွန်တော်တို့နားထောင်လို့ရပါတယ်ဆိုတော့အဲ့ဟာလေးရှင်းပါလားမသိဘူးခင်ဗျာကျွန်တော်ပြောတဲ့ဟာလေးလေဆိုတော့တချို့ကလည်း Zoom နဲ့ familiar ဖြစ်နေပြီးသားဖြစ်တဲ့အတွက်အဆင်ပြေမယ်ပေါ့နော်တချို့ကလည်းအခုမှဒီ fashion စသုံးတဲ့သူမျိုးလည်းပါကောင်းပါနိုင်တယ်ပေါ့နော်ခင်ဗျအဆင်ပြေ thumbs up လေးပေါ့နော် reaction တစ်ခုခုပေးလို့ရပါတယ် okay ပါညာပေါ့နော်ကျွန်တော် chat box ထဲမှာရိုက်လို့ရ okay I think ဟုတ်ကျေးဇူးပါအဲ့ဒါကျွန်တော်က English ဖတ်မှာဖြစ်ရှိနေမှာပေါ့နော်တစ်ခုခုဆိုရင် message box ကနေရိုက်လို့ရပါတယ် all right Tony thank you so much for your time I think it's all good to go yeah
Sure. Good morning, everyone. Can you see my screen?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you. My name is Tony Mizuko. I'm the Chief Executive and Emergency Management Director for a municipality just outside of the city of Boston in Massachusetts. I'm going to be taking you through this training today. I want to apologize first if I speak too quickly. I will attempt to slow it down. I also do want to apologize if there's some noise or disruption that you hear on my end. I am traveling, so I'm currently in a train station. I first want to start before we get into it, just letting everyone know that our hearts and thoughts are with you around the world for the crisis that you're facing in Myanmar, and in particular throughout the whole region.
Hello, Tony. Is going too fast?
Okay, yeah. I will slow it down even further.
Yeah, please.
Just if I could, the Zoom is at capacity, and I know one or two members of my team are trying to get in. If we can't change that, that's fine. We're going to cover a number.
Sorry, Tony, the capacity is only 100 participants, so we are quite packed on it. I'm sorry about that.
No worries. We're going to cover a number of areas today, and we'll be able to do further trainings as a deep dive into each of these different areas. You can see them here on the screen: general safety, social media in a disaster, which a decade or 15 years ago was not something we had to consider. Now it's a serious consideration. Public health safety, information collection safety, basic first aid, first steps, fire and rescue safety, food distribution safety, basic medical triage, and other tips for volunteering during a disaster. I am your lead trainer today, and I will be taking you through the slides. The other individuals who are located, whose names you see here, contributed to this, representing emergency services, experience in medical aid services in a number of different regions in the United States. I apologize for the relatively low quality of the pictures. I had to put the slide deck together fairly quickly and just pull pictures off the internet. Fortunately, some of these folks couldn't get on the call, so they can't get mad at me for pulling bad pictures of them. So we're going to start off with an overview of a few key principles that are very important in any disaster response situation for a volunteer. The first one, and it sounds simple, but is to stay calm. You have to be able to think critically, and your level of emotion will reflect to those around you. The people you are serving have been through a tragedy. It's very traumatic. You're being calm, positive, and upfront with people is going to be critical. You do need to be seen as a source of stability as a volunteer. It's very important. I underlined the next point because it's perhaps the most important out of all of these, is to ensure personal safety. we listed here is you can't help others if you become a victim yourself. The worst thing in any emergency situation is creating a greater strain for the existing resources and emergency services that are there. Sometimes disaster response, even for volunteers, is inherently dangerous, and everyone understands that and they accept that risk. But if you put yourself at risk, if you take chances, if you don't follow good safety protocols, and you get yourself injured, that drains resources from people who need it the most. It is absolutely critical to be safe and to be smart when volunteering, particularly in a situation like this where resources are slim or non-existent. If emergency services are available, you should know when to contact emergency services versus when to help yourself. Now, this could be if you're working on the ground in a disaster-prone area, or even if you're working in a back-end function. You're going to need to know what resources are available and when you should call somebody who knows more than you know and who can handle things that you can't handle. This relates to the next key principle of do no harm, only assist with your skill level. You will be called to do things you're not familiar with and do things outside of your comfort zone. But to use a very simple example, if you are not a mechanic, don't offer to help somebody fix their car. You may make the situation worse. That's not to say you won't be found in a situation where somebody asks you to help them and they're going to guide you through it. But the worst thing you could do is more harm by trying to do something that you don't know how to do. That comes to assisting in hospitals and medical triage, which we'll talk about as well. Only work within your skill level. We all watch TV shows and movies, and you see people doing incredible things in these emergency situations. If you're not trained to do it, it's best that you don't do it. Help the best you can, but do no harm. And the last principle, which relates to the first one, is act with compassion. You have all been through a tragedy. You have dealing with this crisis. The more folks are on the ground, they've lost their homes, they've lost loved ones, they've lost ways of lives. You have to understand that it's not just the physical loss, but the significant psychological loss and the significant psychological impact that a disaster like this can have on individuals. They may have lost the home they grew up in. Now, that home is not just a physical property, but that is their source of psychological comfort, the source of their whole world and everyone they know and love. Their temple may have been destroyed. That may have been the temple their family's been going to for 2 or 3 generations. And there's the loss of that history, of the memories of the family time. So tragedies like this, we look at the physical toll, but the psychological toll is in many cases equally as great, if not more so. One of the recommendations we have is for some basic equipment you should try to carry with yourself into a disaster area or when volunteering. Now, as we go through this presentation, this is sort of the ideal. In any disaster situation, it's not going to always be ideal. But you're going to want to try to take as many resources as you can with you, so that way you're not draining any resources in the area where you're helping out. As an example, we list here disposable gloves and a face mask. You may work at a field hospital where they have thousands of gloves and face masks. It's not a concern, but you don't want to have to be looking for these things if you need them. It's not an exhaustive list, but it's also not a list that you have to be worried if you don't have a whistle, don't stay home and not volunteer because you don't have a whistle. It's just a good tool and tip to be able to have. Where power is spotty, make sure your devices are charged. If you have access to, I call it a battery deck. This is an Anker power unit. If you have access to those before you leave wherever you're staying, try to have those available so that you don't have to draw resources for your own mobile devices and for other folks' mobile devices. That's not going to happen everywhere. That's not going to be the situation any given day. But if you're able to prepare yourself with these resources, it's absolutely a big help to what's going on in the situation, so you're not drawing any resources from what's already there. And I know it sounds a little strange to think that somebody would show up to a disaster site as a volunteer and say, "Where can I charge my phone?" It happens. You know, we're all human. We're all spending a little bit too much time on our devices. And one very small note, responding in an emergency situation as a volunteer, where you're coming in usually right after the emergency services have. It's not an Instagram photo shoot. Dress comfortably, dress conservatively, and make sure you're dressed for the work that you're doing. Some general safety tips: never enter unstable structures unless professionals have cleared them. You're going to see a lot of devastation on the ground, particularly buildings that are partially destroyed, may look like they're leaning or falling over. Unless somebody has cleared that building to enter, do not enter it. If you become a victim yourself, you are drawing resources from those who need it the most. When you're working in an area, it's likely that the emergency services have already been in that area. And if there are any instructions for them, it's critical to follow those instructions. They've been on the ground. They understand what's going on. They understand what areas are safe that may seem unsafe and vice versa. If you are given, we call it PPE or personal protective equipment, make sure to wear it. I understand folks don't like to follow safety rules and they don't want to wear a helmet when they're told to wear a helmet. You don't want to wear boots when you're told to wear boots. If the equipment is given and it's recommended that you wear it, you have to wear it. You are there to help and you are there to assist. You're not there to create additional problems or take additional risks. And remember, if you yourself get injured, and you can get injured doing data collection door to door, it's just a drain on the resources that are already in short supply. If possible, try to work in teams. Never go into dangerous areas alone. Again, wherever you are and whatever your volunteer response is, it's critical that you try to know who you're working with, know your partners, and pay attention to your partners. Disaster zones are inherently unsafe, even beyond the physical security for weeks and months after the event. There's a note here about marking unsafe areas with tape, chalk, or flags. Depending on what you're doing, if you find yourself in that situation where you're being asked to survey an area, be sure to note if something is unsafe. Try to leave a note, even if somebody else might come there a month later, a week later, 6 months later. Staying hydrated is important, and I understand in the context of the disaster that you're facing, the thought that you need to worry about staying hydrated is a concern, but it is. If you don't stay hydrated and you don't take regular breaks, if you're engaged in physical work or you're engaged in work where there's no aircon and you're doing something in the middle of an area where there might otherwise be some aircon, you got to stay hydrated. You have to stay safe. If you yourself can't perform your duties, you're just draining the resources of what's going on in the region. So it's critical to stay hydrated, to take care of yourself, know your limits. Any injuries or hazards should be reported immediately. Even if you think folks might know about it, it's always worth reporting it. In a disaster zone, there is so much that's going on, and the first responders who have been there for quite some time have seen everything. They may know about it, but remember what they're going through in terms of you're going on 3, 4, 5 days of continued emergency response. They're going to miss things. Report things up, but understand that there may be an awareness that a situation exists and there's simply no resources to deal with it. That's one of the challenging things you'll find in a disaster zone like this, where you're going to go in and there might be a small bridge over a small stream in a village somewhere that you let somebody know is starting to collapse, and the response might be there's just nothing that can be done. It's going to fall. So you have to prepare yourselves for that psychologically, but understand that reporting is important. There are going to be a lot of cases where something is reported and there are simply no resources available to deal with it. Everyone's emergency response is going to be different. Everyone's volunteer experience is going to be different. Wherever you go, whether it's an office building inside a city or you're dropped off at a field hospital, it's always important to assess the scene. You don't know the safety of the scene. And by assess the scene, we mean, is it safe for you to enter? Do you have what it takes, or will you become a victim? Know your limits. Know what you're able to do. If you get dropped off at a field hospital and you all of a sudden realize the work that's going on is not what you were asked to do and not what you're capable of, it's important to know what's going on. If you approach a scene and there's some dangers there, you should note them, understand them, and report back whether or not you should be working in that area. Try to get an idea in the area that you're working in, how many people are affected, what resources are here, what's going on. And this could be as simple as you're helping with data collection in a rural village. But when you arrive on scene, take that look around, understand where the dangers are, understand how many people you're dealing with and the scope of what you're dealing with. I don't want anyone to think that they're simply going to get airdropped into the middle of nowhere, but in the response to a disaster like this, there's a lot of unknowns, there's a lot of confusion, there's a lot of overlapping response in some areas and a lack of response in other areas. So you just don't know what you're going to be walking into, and you should be prepared. In terms of your general safety and security, always approach people respectfully and calmly. Trauma can affect communication. So I spoke a few minutes ago about, imagine somebody who has lost a loved one. They have lost the only home they've known their whole lives, the only temple they've known their whole lives, and their whole world is upended. They may not be able to communicate very rationally. They may be upset. They may just not be able to recall. You have to try to be respectful and be calm and understand that. Whatever situation you're in, introduce yourself clearly and calmly. Explain what you're doing and why. Sometimes people will not want help, and that's fine. Based on whatever organization you're volunteering with, they'll likely have a specific protocol for this. But if you're trying to gather data, if you're trying to hand out food, if you're trying to remove rubble and people just don't want help, step away. In terms of working with people in their homes or what were their homes, don't enter unless invited. You may look at somebody's significantly damaged home and see that it is not really there anymore. That's still their space. And this last one is important. Don't offer or promise anything you can't deliver. You may work at a number of sites and folks are going to tell you what they need. And if you don't have the access to the resources to deliver, it's very important that you not promise anything you can't deliver. People's lives will depend on, hey, I heard from this volunteer that they're going to be able to bring me, 50 kilograms of this tomorrow, and then we'll be able to do that. If you don't know that you can do it, do not promise it. I'm going to switch gears for a moment and talk about social media. As I said, a decade or more ago, social media was not really a concern in disasters. Unfortunately, it has become a significant problem in a number of disasters anywhere in the world. Social media can be very helpful, but it can be as harmful as it is helpful. Just some hints here. Double check facts before posting. Misinformation is very, very dangerous. And misinformation doesn't necessarily need to be intentional misinformation. It can simply be where there is a overnight shelter, where there's a food distribution going on. And if you think about a situation like that, if you just share something without knowing it's true and folks think that there's a food distribution site at a certain location, at a certain time, and people show up, it can overwhelm the services that are there. It can cause people to use precious resources to expend in trying to get somewhere only to find out that there's nothing there. It's recommended you only share trusted information from confirmed sources, government agencies, relief organizations. If it's a rumor or if it's unverified, even if it's well-intentioned, do not post it. As a volunteer in an emergency situation like this, you really should refrain from posting anything that's not absolutely helpful. And I would recommend you reduce the level of personal posting that you do while you're working in a disaster area to just the disaster. I know we like to do our humble posts. We like to share. It's part of your own sort of trauma, dealing with the trauma of it, but try to restrict that to the extent practical during an emergency. We talk about what information you can share, open shelters, food and water stations, supply needs, but only post the supply needs if you think that somebody can respond and get those supplies to you. Missing persons information, again, that's very difficult, but if it's an example of something that can be shared in a certain area, but you do have to think about who's going to be looking at anything you might be sharing. And if you're in an area where electricity and internet service have been disrupted, and maybe your phone has satellite access or you have Wi-Fi back at wherever your base camp is, who's reading your post? If it's me from here, I might be able to click on a donation link, but I'm not going to know somebody who can help with a very small need of a truck or a bike or something in a rural area. So just be aware of what your audience would be and what the purpose of sharing that information would be. Use clear language, bullet points, hashtags. We have an example right here on the slide of what you should post. Something very simple. Free meals available at X site at Y time. Keep it simple and keep it straightforward. While I don't expect any volunteers would do this, if there are graphic images of anything, injuries, death, or destruction, be cautious about sharing that. I'm not a fan generally of telling people that something's a trigger warning, but you may want to categorize your posts with a trigger warning, because I may be able to objectively look at a post from halfway around the world and say, gee, that's bad. It's not traumatizing me. But somebody in country who's lost their home, seeing other photos or seeing pictures of places they've known and lived in their whole lives ruined and destroyed, very, very traumatic. So I would avoid it altogether. Don't post photos of any folks you're serving, even if it is as simple as data collection. It's just not recommended. And keep personal details of both yourself, your volunteer group, where you may be staying, what you may be doing off the internet altogether. Be respectful and compassionate. I think everyone would do that in a situation like this. And we talked a little bit about that privacy and security just a moment ago. Get consent before sharing everything, but be cautious about what you're sharing and why. And the question you should ask yourself is, why am I sharing this particular piece of information? If there are official hashtags for a event, it does help to use them. Try to keep them simple. If you are part of a relief group, find out what that organization's mission is, its site, if they have particular hashtags, and what particular information they're going to want shared. They may have a specific policy about what they do or do not want to be shared. If you're not sure, the safest bet, don't share the information. I understand many of you may have family that might be worried about you serving in a disaster area. I would recommend private messaging them through WhatsApp or whatever means you have to get the message out rather than the posting on social media. If you do see false information, correct it if possible. But I also understand you're there to respond for a disaster. You can't spend your whole day on Facebook. And under the using social media for community recovery, we spoke a little bit before the session started. Make sure if folks are donating, you direct folks to legitimate, verified, well-known sources. Sometimes small organizations are good sources for a GoFundMe. There's a couple of challenges that happen in a disaster situation like this. One of them, of course, is fraud. One of them is, of course, sometimes everyone's favorite uncle gets a lot of donations on their GoFundMe, and there's an entire street of people who got absolutely nothing out of that, and it can become a little bit unbalanced. So if you are sharing or you are donating, try to make sure it's directed to known, reputable organizations. Unfortunately, as a result of human nature, post-disaster, there are a lot of scams. Individuals may post as government agents. They may post as utility workers, inspectors. There could be volunteers who are unfortunately out there with nefarious intent. If possible, ask for ID. Don't give personal information out. Check with a supervisor at your site, whatever organization you're with. If somebody comes up and they are asking for certain resources and they're claiming to be from somewhere, there should have been some communication. Post-disaster is a very complicated time. There's a lot going on. There's a lot of misinformation, but you're going to want to just try to verify and understand who you're working with and try to be cognizant of scams going on. Residents should as well. It's not uncommon in disaster situations anywhere in the world for folks to come by and offer to take a deposit to come and fix a roof, fix a foundation, and then to simply disappear after having taken a deposit. You may not be able to do anything about that necessarily as a volunteer, depending on what area you are working in, but it's important to let residents know and to be aware of it. We already spoke about fake charities and fake relief funds. We're going to go into some fire and rescue safety tips, and understanding that everyone may be working in a different scenario with different NGOs in the region, but these are important things you should know as you go through working in a disaster area. If you're working around collapsed buildings, most important, do not enter. Even if a building is partially collapsed and it looks stable, there's a possibility that it will shift suddenly. Look out for things like loose debris, shifting floors, sagging ceilings. Stay alert for any type of gas leak, propane leak. If you smell gas or propane, leave the area and let somebody know about it. Now, this could be a more urbanized area that has underground gas infrastructure, but even in a rural area, there could have been cooking gas somewhere under a collapsed ceiling that is leaking and creates a dangerous situation. The organization you're working with will probably provide you with tools. I don't know that you would be doing any survivor search, but if you do have to, using long tools, gently looking through the rubble carefully. If somebody is trapped, and again, unfortunately, given we are several days post-event, it's unlikely that you would encounter that. But if you are working with a medical response team and that is what you're doing, don't try to move large debris. Professional rescue equipment is going to be needed for that. And be very cautious about structural elements. They may look withered, damaged, whatnot, and that they couldn't possibly hold up part of a building, but they may be all that's holding up a building, a roof, a staircase. Working around rubble and debris, watch for sharp objects, broken glass, nails, unstable piles. Sometimes it's easy to look at debris as just a bunch of stone or brick or concrete, but there's a lot of dangerous objects that end up in a debris pile.
Tony, sorry for interrupting. I think we have some issue for the translation size. Can I
Okay,
please
I'm going
chat for 1 minute, please? Yeah.
Yeah.
Hello, agent အဆင်ပြေလားခင်ဗျာညီမလေးဟိုဟာဖြစ်နေပြောတယ်ခင်ဗျာအတန်သေးချာမကြားဘူးပြောတယ်ညီမလေးတန်လေအတန်တိုးနေလို့လေခင်ဗျာ
အတန်တိုးတာရဲ့အတန်ပြတ်တောင်းဖြစ်နေတာရဲ့ဖြစ်နေရှင်
အတန်ပြတ်တောင်းလည်းဖြစ်တယ်ဟုတ်ကျေးဇူးတင်ပါတယ်ဗျာ comment ပြပြရဟိုညီမလေးအဆင်ပြေရလား Okay အဲ့ဆိုရင်ပြန်စလိုက်အောင်လားညီမအတန်နည်းနည်း voice လေးဖြစ်ဖြစ်နည်းနည်းတင်ပေးပါလားခင်ဗျနော်ဟုတ်ကဲ့ကျေးဇူးပါအဲ့ဆိုကိုပြန်စလိုက်မယ်နော်ဟုတ်ကဲ့ Hi Tony thank you I think we can restart again sorry for interrupting
Okay. No worries. Glad everything's working out. We were talking about working with rubble and debris. Never dig blindly. You don't know what is below where you're digging or where you're moving resources. And again, that emergency response first phase will have likely passed before you're on site, but it's important to know you don't know what's underneath rubble. It looks like a pile of concrete. You don't know what's underneath there. If there are personal items, you should flag them. Don't remove rubble unless trained to do so. Again, it appears like it might just be a pile of concrete, but there's a lot more that could go into it. It's not necessarily likely anyone will be working in that area, but if you are, these are important safety tips. If you do see downed power lines, stay at least 10 meters away. Electricity can arc. Don't think you can stand next to a power line. If you see a downed power line, assume it's live and dangerous. Always assume a power line is live. Don't touch anything in connection with the power line. Keep others away and make sure to put a note up if there are if you do see down lines somewhere that somebody might not be familiar with. This could be as simple as if you're doing a damage assessment in a rural area that does have electric service. You may not notice it from the road, but there may be a line that's down behind a building that connects to something in the building that could very easily trigger a fire or injury to yourself. We spoke about gas. If there are gas or chemical spills, be aware for what you smell. If you suspect gas or chemicals, that's certainly a significant fire risk, and it's a significant risk to your health as well. Look for things like strong smells. If you smell bleach, fuel, ammonia, just be careful working in an area like that and understanding what your responsibilities are and how strong the smell might be. Of course, if you do have any chemical exposure, rinsing the skin with clean water is the most important thing that you can do. It's about being situationally aware as you go through a disaster area, making sure that you keep yourself safe so you don't become a victim and add to the strain on the resources. In terms of some public health tips, hand washing is critical. I know when you think of the magnitude of a disaster like this, it sounds strange to say washing hands, but disasters like an earthquake, particularly a significant one, are often a sequence of disasters. The public health crisis that can follow something like this can be as damaging and difficult as the initial disaster. Try to stay, if your organization has hand stations set them up, distribute water to sanitize where water is scarce. It's very important. Promote safe toilet use. Obviously, where there's a lot of damage and folks don't have access to their normal toilet use, there's going to be a desire to simply let nature take its course. Avoid that as a volunteer. And in areas where you're working, try to make sure you know where sanitation services are available and direct people to them. If water sources are contaminated, make sure you focus on trying to boil or treat water. Urban areas will likely have a municipal water supply. Even in more rural areas where you have well water, the shifting of the ground can cause significant contamination to existing wells. And we're not talking about just the quality of the water. You're talking about a shift where a significant amount of chemicals or other waste ends up getting into a water supply. The disease that can result from that can end up causing a whole separate series of issues for a region. In terms of disease prevention, basic mask use is helpful, especially if there are respiratory outbreaks. Report clusters of symptoms. Be aware of your own symptoms. Here, of course, we say ensure routine vaccinations are up to date. Measles and tetanus can be a big issue post-disaster. Certainly that needs to be dealt with on a macro level, but you may be called on at some point to assist in endeavors like that. If mosquito control is an issue, nets would be helpful in a situation like this. You have the initial tragedy and disaster, and then you have all of the subsequent public health related diseases that it can cause. The more you can prevent those, the more you can assist in the recovery. It's likely that many of you will engage in food distribution, whether it's packaged or prepared food. We want to go through just a couple of tips for that as well. In a situation where you're distributing food, clear lines and distribution points are important. It doesn't matter if you have to get chunks of concrete from the side of the road to set up a line for people to come in. You want to work in pairs and groups. Food distribution can become very unruly, so a well thought out system is important. Be respectful and clear and calm. People may be scared, hungry, or frustrated. You may have not missed a meal. You may get on a bus. You get distributed to a food distribution site where you're happy to finally be able to contribute and help out. The people getting something as simple as a bag of rice may not have eaten in a day or 2 days or 3 days, or maybe they're eating one meal a day. So understand the physical and physiological trauma they're going through, as well as understanding that you have to manage these situations well. Be alert to what's going on because it can create a lot of problems. Some folks may have dietary restrictions. I understand that sounds strange in a disaster, but if you are diabetic and you can't eat certain things and somebody comes up to you saying, I can't eat the food you've provided, it's not a point of privilege. It's a point of this person trying to maintain their health, and try to be aware of that and respond as appropriate, understanding that it may not be possible with the limited resources that you have. If there do appear to be any food-related illnesses or reactions, report that immediately. Again, it would be better not to distribute food than distribute food that's going to make a certain percentage of the population sick. If you're distributing prepared food, this is where your personal protective equipment is helpful. Gloves, masks, hair nets are important if available. You may not be working in an ideal situation, but if that's possible, it's always a good idea to make sure you practice that good PPE. Be aware of your surroundings. Further weather can come in and damage something. You could get overwhelmed, and there may be a situation where you need to exit. But that comes in with that situational awareness of looking at the food distribution site, knowing what your role is, knowing who's in charge, having things clearly laid out, knowing what your mission is going to be important. These are all questions to make sure you ask whatever NGO you're working with, or if you yourself are engaged in it just on your own, be very clear. I understand the very human desire to simply load up a truck with food and drive it to an area where people do not have food and distribute it. And that will happen a lot in different areas, and it's certainly needed in many cases. But you need to be aware to not create more of a problem than you are trying to solve. And of course, as you're distributing food, wash and sanitize hands frequently, keep food at proper temperatures if possible, avoiding cross-contamination, and try to only distribute food that is properly packaged or inspected. There are going to be a lot of folks who want to help out, and they're going to simply cook a pot of something at home and want to bring it somewhere. Nobody can control that, but sometimes that can create more of a challenge than it can.
Tony, I'm sorry about that. Again, sorry interrupting you. We have some technical issue here with the interpreters. Give me again 1 minute to check with them.
No problem.
Yeah. Hello ညီမလေး agent ကြားရပါလားဟုတ်ညီမလေးဟိုပါလေ internet connection ကြောင့်ထင်တယ်ခင်ဗျာဒီဘက်ကညီမလေးအတန်ကိုလေပြတ်တောက်ဖြစ်နေရပေါ့နော်ညီမလေးတောက်လျှောက်ဖြစ်နေရခင်ဗျာညီမလေးဟုတ်ဒါဒီလိုလုပ်လိုက်မလားညီမလေးအကိုတို့ဟိုညီလေးနဲ့ပဲခဏ switch ပြန်လုပ်လိုက်မလားခင်ဗျာတကယ်လို့ဟိုညီမလေး internet ကောင်းတဲ့ခါကျအကိုတို့ပြန်ပြီးတော့ညီမလေးဖက်ကိုပြန်ပြီးတော့ inform လုပ်ပေးပါမယ်လေခင်ဗျာအဲ့လိုလုပ်လိုက်ပါညီမလေးဟုတ်ကျေးဇူးပါ ညီလေးကြားလားမသိဘူးခင်ဗျဟုတ်ကျေးဇူးပါညီလေးအဲဒါဆိုအခုပြန်ဆောင်လိုက်ပါမယ် Hi Tony, thank you so much. And we can restart again. And could you please a bit slow down your uh, presentation also, please? Thanks.
Will do.
Yeah, thanks.
We're going to next talk about safety tips for information collection volunteers. Sounds a little abstract in the context of a disaster, but a lot of different groups are going to be called on to categorize information and to collect information. In terms of general awareness, always approach people respectfully and calmly. We said earlier, trauma affects communication. You may face situations where somebody has been approached by a volunteer 5, 10, 15, 20 times to talk about what they lost and to talk about what their needs are. And it can become very frustrating for those suffering from a disaster that they're constantly giving out the same information again and again. Be respectful, calmly work with everyone. If possible, visible vests and ID badges, or at least knowing what organization you are working with, is very important. Travel discreetly yourself. Try not to even flaunt phones, watches, jewelry. If you're heading into a site, leave as much of that home as possible. If you are going door to door, teams always work the safest. It's just better for everyone if you're able to do that. The situation may not allow it, but it would be best for everyone if you could. You should have an emergency contact protocol in place. And what that means is if you're going out, you should know who you report to an emergency to. If you're injured, your contact information of who you would like somebody to call should be readily available. Most organizations on the ground will get this information before they have you volunteering for them, but this is an emerging situation and it's likely to be confusing for quite a while. As I said earlier, this is really the ideal situation, which is not always what happens on the ground. In terms of communicating with individuals, keep your tone neutral and compassionate. Do not push people for answers. Be patient and understand that sometimes you may need to hear somebody's story. And that's what they actually need in the moment, is to hear their story. Part of folks' response to dealing with trauma is going to be wanting to tell their story. Some people will not want to, but some people want to tell you again and again. You should be prepared to hear stories again and again that are going to be hard to hear. They're going to be very tragic, but part of people's moving through the healing process as they're going through with this is going to be wanting to just share what happened to them again and again. Listen compassionately, and when they do, and for those who don't want to share it, accept that that's what they don't want to do, and that's what we need to do. We're going to talk a little bit about medical triage and basic medical assistance. The golden rule, if you're not trained, comfort, communication, and coordination is what you should do. Let professionals handle complex care and only assist them as instructed. I had said earlier, images on TV shows of somebody running into a situation and performing an emergency surgery with no medical assistance. That doesn't happen. You're going to hurt somebody. Only perform what you're trained to perform. It's unlikely that anyone would be doing basic medical triage at this point, several days past the initial disaster. However, that could happen, particularly with disease outbreaks. So I just want to explain how a basic medical triage works. So if you're working in a situation like this, you'll be aware of it. Triage means sorting victims by helping the most people survive. The categories here are pretty simple to what most international organizations would use. So you're going to have a green category. We would call it walking wounded, minor injuries. People can walk, people can talk. You're really just going to guide them to a safe zone. They might need some very basic first aid, which could just include a bandage. The next category is what we would call delayed. There are injuries that need care. They're not life-threatening at this point. They may need to lie down. They may need comfort. This could be something like a broken limb. Red would be immediate, and that's somebody who has trouble breathing, heavy bleeding. If they appear to be in shock, you need to immediately make sure somebody else is available to help them with medical training. Unfortunately, based on the situations that you're in, that medical training may be limited. There may not be a lot of resources, and you should prepare yourself that in some cases there just won't be those resources available. But if you're not a trained medical provider, anything beyond basic first aid assistance is all you should be doing. Unfortunately, if you're working in a disaster area like this, it is possible you will come upon folks who are already deceased. Make sure somebody is aware of it and avoid the area if possible. If you're not trained to check the condition that somebody's in, you're going to have to report that to somebody with some medical services experience to be able to do that. Again, it's unlikely you'd be engaging in medical triage several days out, but you could be working at a field hospital where folks are coming in, and there's always going to be that triage process going on of, do they have a cold or a flu? Do they have a broken limb? Do they just have some scrapes? Are they in immediate need for medical care? In terms of basic first aid actions, you don't need to be a medic to help in certain ways. If somebody is bleeding, clean cloths, gauze, apply firm pressure, elevate the wound above the heart if possible, and don't remove embedded objects, pad around them. That is something you're going to need to call a professional to assist you with. Again, I understand Hollywood makes it look simple. Somebody has a large piece of glass in their arm, and I'm just going to pull it out because I'm the volunteer that wants to make a difference. You need to let trained medical professionals help you out with that. I'm not a trained medical professional. I would not do something like that. If somebody is unconscious and they're breathing, you can turn them to their side, which is known as the recovery position, to make sure their airway stays open. Monitor, reassure them, and call for somebody with a little bit more medical experience. If you've been trained to perform CPR, you can perform CPR if somebody is unconscious. If you have not been trained or trained recently, do not perform CPR. Call for help, stay with the person. A lot of folks are going to have burns and scrapes. Cool the area with clean, cool water. Cover loosely with a nonstick cloth, and don't pop blisters, don't apply creams. Somebody may ask for something like that. You can provide them with whatever services you have available, but you yourself should not be engaging in that unless appropriately trained. I'm going to pause for one moment. Deputy Cody, are you on the call?
Yes, I'm here, Tony.
Thank you. This is Deputy John Cody, our Deputy Fire Chief. Is there anything you'd like to add specifically on the applying first aid and how to apply first aid? I mean, just for somebody who's never applied a bandage before, just a little bit more detail than I would give.
No, actually, you've hit it. The biggest thing, the only thing the thing that I would add is to, and you alluded to this earlier, is to remain calm. Whenever you want to help a person, your presentation and the way you speak and the way you carry yourself, you'll actually do more harm than good. Even if you don't know anything about medical, just sitting with them, get their name. What I would also say is, if there's, particularly with children, involve the parents. Ask for their name. You want their medical history. Do you take any medications? Do you have any allergies to medicine? By doing these simple little tasks, you're involving the parent, and they feel that they're helping their child, but you're also gaining information that you can then turn over to those first responders. So it's very important that you approach slowly, you talk calmly, and you present yourself that we're here to help. Don't promise them that everything's going to be fine. Don't tell them that it's not. You just want to present yourself, identify yourself, and then begin to get information. As far as everything that Tony said, I absolutely agree with it, but your presentation can do a world of good. That's all I would add to that, Tony. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Chief Cody. The last point before I move on to the next section is I want to talk about emotional first aid. We discussed this a little bit. You may be sitting with injured and shocked people, even if you can't do anything for them. And that's whether they have a medical issue or they've lost their home, they've lost their business, they've lost their loved ones. Listen, let them talk, let them cry. I know some folks are not good at dealing with people who are crying. I never like to see people cry, but just sit with them, empathize with them. Protect their privacy and never share their medical information. But most importantly, you're going to be there to provide comfort to people who may need a shoulder to cry on. You should prepare yourself to have to deal with that, to be okay with that, and to have to hear stories of tragedy and hard times again and again and again. That emotional first aid that you're able to provide is critical. Tips for volunteers for ongoing and long-term disaster relief. The recovery from an event like this is going to take years. There's a desire to immediately get on the ground and patch people's wounds and feed them, and that's important, and it has to happen. But there'll be a lot more going on in the long term. You cannot do everything in one day. You yourself need to pace yourself. That burst of energy to show up and do as much good as possible needs to be met with an understanding that this is a long-term recovery, and your assistance is going to be needed long-term in a lot of different areas. You personally try to rotate tasks. It's okay to say no, or you need to step back. Your well-being throughout the process is important. As I kept saying, it will cause a drain on resources if you're not able to help, or if you require additional help in a disaster zone. The quote here, take care of yourself so you can keep taking care of others. Disaster zones evolve quickly. Attend daily briefings. Pay attention to the news to the extent that you have access to the information so you understand what's happening. If your NGO is providing daily updates or information updates, read them, understand them. Even a couple of days on the ground where you think you know what is going on, you think you're familiar with the situation, things will change rapidly. If you have a team lead or a coordinator, stay in touch with them, communicate regularly with them, communicate regularly with your team members. Burnout and stress can happen. And I know it sounds, in the face of such a monumental disaster, it sounds challenging to talk about burnout or stress, but it will happen. You should have to look for it. You should be aware of it. Look for it. Irritability, fatigue, emotional detachment, insomnia. Pay attention to what's happening. You may need to step back at some point. The first 5 days are going to look different than the second 5 days, and the third 5 days, and the fourth 5 days. So early on, you're going to focus on rescue and emergency relief. It's then going to shift to recovery and rebuilding. But even in the course of a day, you could be out collecting data in a rural village, and then all of a sudden you are doing physical labor, helping clear a site for deliveries by the afternoon. It's going to change. You need to be flexible. You may be called on or be volunteering with the understanding that you're doing one thing, and then all of a sudden you are very quickly doing something else. You have to be ready to switch your role. You have to be ready to change and take on different tasks. You're going to have to be flexible. Some additional tips. Keep learning. We spoke about this just a moment ago, but make sure you understand what's going on and take an opportunity from every individual you work with to learn about the area, the region, the work that's going on, why things are done the way that they're done. Focus on the long term. Rebuilding is going to come after relief, and that's one of the things you have to keep in mind. You're not going to rebuild a school tomorrow. You're going to comfort people. You're going to make sure they have food and immediate needs. Housing is going to come before rebuilding a school, but there will come a time where community leaders and volunteers are going to be called on to build schools and build temples and rebuild the community as a whole. Obviously, I don't think there would be a challenge with respecting local customs and listening to what the community says they need, but be mindful of that. Be mindful of people telling you what they need, even if you think they need something else. There's a great line in here that we use that I like. Prioritize dignity, not charity, in your interactions. By the grace of God, you weren't affected by this disaster the same way as other people would. So be aware of that, be humble, and realize that you're part of one community there to help each other. Trauma is going to take time. Again, people lost loved ones. They lost their whole lives. It takes time. People are going to react differently. You may get shocked when people are angry at you. People say they don't want you around. They don't want your help. That's all part of responding to the trauma that has taken place. You should honor their stories. You should listen to folks and understand what they're going through and the impact they've had and how long their recovery is going to be. We already talked about using social media responsibly, both in the short term and the long term. I would also say focus on the medium term for social media. Initially, there's the thoughts and prayers. There's the here's a GoFundMe. Here's some pictures of some relief. But you need to make sure that your neighbors, your family members, people around the world are still talking about this in 60 days, in 120 days, in 180 days, because that recovery is going to take a long time. And you can play an important role in making sure that it still stays in the minds of people a year, 2 years later, which is important. Finally, and I know hasn't been the most positive presentation that we've all been through, but celebrate small wins, share moments of joy and resilience and recovery. It's important to smile and understand, as tragic as this is, everyone is human and humans are going through it. And the one bright thing is that everyone is here because they want to help and they want to assist people. And that's really the nature of humanity that we want to focus on. As each day ends, as each shift ends, make sure you take some time to reflect. Think about what did you learn? What would you do differently? Debrief with your team often. It is very important as you're going through something like this to talk with the people you're working with. Even if you're, a couple hundred miles away and you're doing social media on the back end and you're not in a disaster zone, that's fine. You are dealing with heavy, challenging, traumatic things. You need to debrief. You need to talk about it. You need to make sure it doesn't impact you any more than it is. We talk about considering writing about your experiences to help future volunteers. That's always important, but that's sort of a down the road. I'm going to pause here. Apologize for talking as quickly as I did, since I often do talk a little too quickly. But I'd be happy to take any questions. I have some of my team here, and I know we are going to be following this up with a few other sessions. We can repeat this session as well as dive a little bit more into basic first aid. So I'll pause here and turn it back over to the team.
Thank you so much, Tony, and also the Deputy Fire Chief, Cody, as well for your input as well. And we just have only one interesting question here. Is asking about, is there any control to reach to the we cannot control it to reach further. We cannot. Okay. Is there any kind of device or that we could be reached to the people who is under suffer? Yeah, on the ground. I think this is the question, right, Shima?
Yes. The question is because most of the people stay stuck under the building. So we don't have any blueprint or something like that. So is there any system that we could reach to someone who stuck under the building or something like that?
So I'll ask the deputy fire chief to answer that. I mean, if a building's collapsed and you're looking at what tools there are to reach and know what's helping folks under the building, I'll defer to the deputy chief. But just start by saying the challenge you're going to face is there are different devices. You're never going to have enough of them for the size and scope of what you're dealing with. Deputy chief, do you want to just talk through how we would go through something like that?
Absolutely. When we approach, particularly the level of destruction, first of all, I'm very sorry for what you're going through. Your structural engineers, your days into the event, you want to have those engineers in we call them our tech rescue teams, your rescue teams you don't want to just walk in, and even if you hear people yelling, that's where you'll begin your search, obviously. But you want to get the experts to tell you how that building, moving a piece of rubble may affect, and your void spaces will become kill zones. They'll collapse on you. So it's very important that you listen to the engineers and the people that understand how this building is going to have to be pulled apart. That is you'll use a lot of tie-offs. We use a lot of ropes and shoring, wooden blocks, metal blocks. You cannot just run in and start pulling apart a building. It's dangerous for the people inside. It's dangerous for your rescue. So that would be my biggest advice, is truly, especially as the volunteer, if you come across and you hear someone you really want to get to a professional to have a design system. What we never want to do is start having people what we call self-deploy. You need to manage your resources and you need to manage your people. It's going to be very important that working in teams and working in a systematic approach is going to be the quickest and most efficient way for everybody, not just that one particular building.
Yes, thank you so much, Cody, and also Tony. I have another question here. So, for the possible infection diseases, so how we should be prepared as a volunteer?
So the question is how to be prepared for which types of diseases, just in general, what can come after?
Yes, yeah.
Yes.
That didn't mention anything about specific diseases.
Okay. I'll ask Stacy, our public health director, if she wants to weigh in on that. Stacy is the director of public health. She's also a registered nurse.
Hello, everyone. Again, I'd like to say the same thing. I'm very sorry for what's happening to you. Public health wise, the first thing you should do is check your immunization status. Take a look at your vaccines, review them. I would say most importantly would be any vaccines that you can get for respiratory viruses, because you'll be in close quarters with people if you're living in a camp. And then also, number one is get your tetanus up to date. Most people have had that as a childhood primary series, but then you need boosters along the way. If you can't get a booster now, get one as soon as you can. And then also other vaccines, hepatitis A, make sure you're up to date with that. So I would those are the important ones I would look at. If it's flu, if you can get a Hep A, but tetanus definitely, because one of the number one things is skin infections, things that because you're going in moving debris, you are at very high risk to get minor cuts and scratches. You may look at it and go, oh, it's just a little cut. Don't ignore minor cuts and scratches. And these are things that are going to develop as the days go on. You look at it, you may not get it bad. It may look red. You may see it getting worse. So immediately after any cut and scratch, no matter how minor it seems, clean it with clean water and cover it. So you don't want any kind of exposure to the elements, the debris, any kind of contaminants. Also, GI illnesses. GI illnesses are very common, and like I said, respiratory illnesses. Even for the volunteers in your camp together, if somebody has a respiratory illness, you want to keep them together, separate them from healthy people. GI illnesses, vomiting and diarrhea, keep them separate. So you want to separate anyone who's ill. That's very important, away from anyone else who is not having symptoms. And we already touched upon foodborne illnesses a little bit. We talked about food. If it's cold, it has to be kept cold. If it's a food that's meant to be hot, it has to be kept hot. So I would recommend temperature stable foods, things that are in packages and cans, things that don't require refrigeration. Again, very important. The last thing you want in close quarters is a GI illness. And again, if water is scarce, you won't be able to wash your hands and it will spread, and people that are making the food will then spread it. So key takeaway here is cover as much of your arms and legs and your skin as possible, because in the coming days and weeks, you're going to see skin infections are very common. And you don't want to get something like and tetanus. For those who don't know, it is a bacteria that goes through the skin. A lot of times puncture wounds or just cuts. Clostridium tetani is the bacteria, and you just want to make sure that is the one thing, if you can go for that vaccine, is to check that. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much, Stacy and Tony again. For this question is especially Chima, it is for you and me that we could host this kind of trainees again if it happens, this kind of tragic situations. Allow me to switch back to Burmese. ကျွန်တော်တို့လေခင်ဗျအခုကတော့ volunteer သွားမဲ့ဟို အဖွဲ့တွေယူတွေပေါ့နော် individual အနေနဲ့သွားတဲ့အခါပြင်ဆင်သင့်တဲ့ဟာတွေကိုအခုလိုမျိုးexpert တွေကနေပြီးတော့ knowledge sharing လုပ်ပေးရပေါ့နော်ဆိုတော့အခုသူပေးခဲ့တဲ့ presentation slide ကိုလည်းကျွန်တော်တို့ translation လုပ်ပြီးတော့ကျွန်တော်တို့ပို့ပေးပါမယ်ဒါတစ်ခုပေါ့နော်နောက်တစ်ခုကကျတော့ကျွန်တော်တို့emergency kit တွေနဲ့ပတ်သက်ပြီးတော့ဒီ medical knowledge sharing ပုံစံမျိုးเนาะရွှေမှာကျွန်တော်တို့အဲ့ဒါလေးလည်းတစ်ခုစီစဉ်နေပါတယ်ခင်ဗျဒီတစ်ရက်နှစ်ရက်အတွင်းပေါ့နော်ဆိုတော့ဒါလေးတွေကိုအနည်းဆုံးဥပမာလေးနဲ့ပြင်ဆင်သွားလို့ရခဲ့ရင်ပို့ပြီးတော့သွားတဲ့သူတွေအောင် ground သွားတဲ့သူတွေအဆင်ပြေမှာပေါ့နော်ခင်ဗျရွှေမှာတစ်ခုဖြည့်ချင်တာရှိလား
And we are going to share this session in Burmese as well. And we are going to share the recording as well. And also, Tony and Tim provided the presentation slide with us. We are also translating in Burmese, which will be very useful for everyone. So we are going to share this on our pages, website, and social media as well. So yes, we will try to do the follow-up sharing session through online. Yes, we will try to share as much as possible quickly because we are also working with the team to translate everything and to prepare all the material, and we will try to share this by tomorrow. I would like to request to be patient as well.
Right, so switch back into English. Thank you, Streamer, for the explanations. We also share all the recordings and also reference resources document. And Tony also promised to us he could be share any kind of relevant resources. Then we could also share with all everyone. I think we have one audience here who raised the hand. There's no name, just iPhone.
Okay.
So,
Sorry to interrupt. Actually, okay, my question is that, in my network, most of the victims, they are staying, inside the churches or inside the monasteries, even if the buildings are like cracked. So are there any safer places for the victims to stay, at the moment? Would you recommend any, safer places?
So the short answer to that question, I think, is the challenge you're facing is it's not ideal. People are going to stay in an unsafe situation. The buildings where folks are staying should get the priority for engineers coming to inspect them and making sure that they're safe. But a home that is safe is better than a temple or a monastery that may not be safe. But those should receive priority for engineers to come and look at those facilities to make sure that they're safe because they're housing a lot of people. That's where those resources should go first. In the immediate 7 to 14 days after a disaster like this, people are going to stay in unsafe situations. And that's one of the challenges in a disaster response is knowing you're doing things that you would otherwise not do. But if you know anyone in those situations or staying at temples or monasteries, reaching out to local authorities and asking for assistance and verifying that the building is safe is critical. A single-family home could be a tragedy, but a monastery where there's 100 families could be a significantly more dangerous situation.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much, Tony, for covering this question. So we have another question here for water sensation. Sensation is not too easy to boil water for the making drinking water. So how we could solve this big issue with chlorine and bleaching powder?
Stacy, it's a little bit outside my wheelhouse. Stacy, do you have any hints on making water safe if you can't boil it? And the concern with chlorine or bleaching powder is you're likely to make somebody sick if you can't boil the water. Stacy, any thoughts?
Yeah, so here we have these little tablets, the little chlorination tablets that you can put in water. That'll help if it's tough. I know. I'm not an expert in that area either, and all we have is the little tablets other than that, that's really all you have. If you have nothing else, but for drinking, I would really recommend you know the source, and I know it's easy for me to say, and prioritize the drinking water as to be the where you know it's from a reliable source, and then maybe the chlorinated or the boiled water. You need both. They kill different organisms. Maybe that for wound care or for cleaning up. Sorry, I don't.
We can get a we can actually reach out to our water folks and get a little bit more of a detailed answer and have that get out with the slides. Same thing with the question on trenching for waste disposal. We'll have to think about what the best way to go about that is, other than just generally attempt to keep it as far away from water and other sources as possible is sort of general rule number one.
Yeah, and there are some kits that you can get. I know people that do a lot of camping that you can put the water in and you pull it through and it filters through. That's another thing that you can do. That might be something that can be made available.
Yeah, bottled water is going to be critical as supply trucks start rolling in. Bottled water is really what you'll find all of a sudden is not just we're sort of accustomed to, we have a bottled water and we just take a little drink and isn't it nice? But in a disaster situation, that bottled water quickly becomes, as Stacy has a bottled water right there, that becomes what you cook with, what you treat wounds with, and what you're cleaning with and otherwise dealing with. So as you're going onto a site, if you have access to clean water, that's important to bring with you. If you have access to water at home and you're traveling to a site that doesn't have access to it, fill your own water bottles and try to take the supplies you need with you, so you're not taking from any of the limited supplies anywhere. We can get some additional detail on that. We'll include it in a guide.
Thank you, Tony. And is there any questions from the participant?
Yeah, participant, you can also ask in Burmese as well. I think we can
Translate it.
to translate. Yeah. Right, so we have another question in the chat box. So the question asking about, is there any standard operation procedure guideline for coordinating all the on-ground supporting CSO, NGO, and all the organizations to follow the guidance or guidelines? Is there any this kind of standard operation procedures? You can share any reference on that?
Sure. So I guess the challenge is in the States, we use what we call the incident command system, which is how you set up any type of emergency response situation where you have somebody in a region who's in charge, and this would apply to a smaller NGO as well. There's a person in charge, and then you have your section heads. You really are forming a quasi-military structure to know exactly who is in charge, who reports to them. The problem is that system, and it works well, is ideal for a single isolated incident in one place. And they almost never work when you have a challenge with a large area in a lot of different places. We can provide you with some ICS training slides to give you an idea of how you should be setting up and framing your organizations. But the first 10 to 20 days, you are going to have an NGO arrive on site. You're going to set up your team. You're going to know what you're doing. And then all of a sudden, a much larger NGO is going to come on and take over for it. And then all of a sudden, there's a different NGO that's going to come in and handle water distribution, and nobody else is doing water distribution. We'll give you some of that ICS information, but things are really going to continue to change for the next 10 to 15 days. It's going to be a disorganized mess. We saw that with COVID, where every state has their emergency response framework, which is great for single little isolated emergencies and nothing else going on. That never actually happens. What happens is a national emergency like this that's affecting the entire country.
Thank you so much, Tony.
Could I just add one thing?
ICS, yeah.
I apologize. The only thing I would add is what I would do is have a written plan, because you can adjust your written plan. And then the most important part of that is to disseminate that plan to everyone, so you have clear lines. If you are on from police, fire, volunteer work, search and rescue, cooking and food. Everyone has to know exactly who they're to report to and exactly what they're going to do and the hours they're expected to do it. But it's also, you're going to be able to reevaluate that. And as Tony explained, as your organization and more of these volunteers arrive, they're going to be able to take those plans and assess what has worked and what has not worked. It's very important. You cannot just do this by word of mouth. You must have a written plan, and then you must disseminate that plan down to everyone. And everyone needs to know exactly. And work at the top is going to set that. So you must, we call it a unified command. That just means that the chief of police, the fire department, the head of your volunteer organization are all meeting together. So we're all having input on what exactly is expected from each individual entity. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Cody, and also the Tony. We have another question here. Okay, it's an interesting one. Also in English in the chat box. So to enter the buildings, yes, to wear the PPEs. The weather is extremely hot here, around 40, 42. So then what item we should be prioritized wearing?
Sure. So the question was, it may be too hot to wear the PPE. Then don't enter the building. You have to wear the PPE. You don't have to bring a whole kit with you, but a helmet would be a priority. Shoes that are comfortable, that allow you to move, will be comfortable. If there's dust in the air, eyeglasses. But if you're entering a building, that vest and that hard hat are critical, particularly the hard hat. If you are entering without it and you injure yourself, you are draining resources from the people who need them. Now, don't bring your backpack with you. Don't bring your whole kit. Do not go in alone. Make sure somebody knows you're going in there. Don't enter at night. If you don't enter at night, again, you don't have to bring your flashlight in with you during the day, but that hard hat, the vest, safe shoes, absolutely critical. Otherwise, you're going to run the risk of injuring yourself. And then who's there to rescue you when you are the rescuer? Focus on those items. Make sure somebody knows you're going in. Best practice, if you have a team of 2 or 3 entering a building, somebody should remain outside the building. So that way that person could call for help if needed. There's a question about unethical behavior. If you notice it, if you see it, it is unfortunate. Report it to that organization's higher ups, report it to your own organization's higher ups, the authorities, if possible, depending on what it happens to be. It may not be something you report in the moment, but let's face it, human nature is human nature. You see somebody pocketing a whole bunch of supplies or whatnot, take note of it, let your supervisors know, have them or you reach out to that organization. It's unfortunate that that's going to happen, but you should report it up and be aware of it.
Thank you, Tony. Thank you so much for the answer. So regarding the trusted organizations, I'm also working on the list of organization that we could do the donation as a trust person, and also as Tony and Cody already mentioned this, we have to go through uh, the township's organizing organization. I'm not really sure yet who is leading all these initiatives. So we are also trying to be helping out that one. And of course, you could also be trying to contact with Shrima as a FC team. And there's another question is very interesting. Yes, we also have a focus of weather focus in the rainings. It could happen. We're not sure yet. It may be in the 1 or 2 days. If this happened, how we could be prevent possible disease outbreak.
So the rain in the forecast for the impacted areas is going to create a significant problem. It may stop disaster response for a day or two until things dry out. And I know that's going to sound difficult, that all of a sudden people are just going to stop things for a day or two, but attempting to engage in that work while there's a lot of rain going on is going to create more problems than it would solve. As for water pooling, it can be very dangerous. Water, depending on how much there is, whether it's pooling and mosquitoes become an issue, or whether water and waste mixes, and now that water ends up, traveling down a street or traveling into people's homes. I guess one thing that's important to note that I did not mention is you should always treat water as toxic unless you otherwise know. So just because you see a little pool or a little stream, just assume it is toxic unless you know it's been through a filtration process. Water is generally toxic unless it's treated. So when you see it somewhere, assume that that water is unhealthy, not to be used to drink. Don't think it's safe to wade through. Don't think, I mean, if you have to, you have to, but just assume that the water is toxic.
Thank you, Tony. So we have we will share the PowerPoint presentation in also English and Burmese version in both. So we have last question here. Can you please share some tips and trick about information gathering in the affected area? So I know one thing about this MIMUs, it's Myanmar Information Management Unit or something. So in MIMUs, you can find the websites. They are sharing all the relevant information, keep in update. And you can also follow UN organizations like UNWFP, WHO, and other organizations. They are quite update, and we can also trust these kind of platform as well.
Great. I
Yeah.
know we're getting close to wrapping up. I'll close. Yeah, the last question about tips and tricks for information gathering. We did discuss that a little bit in the slides. Whatever NGO is gathering information, it's important to know what you're gathering and why, and don't gather information you don't need. Be respectful. If people don't want to give you information, don't give them. You don't need to take their information. Just work with them on that, but make sure there's a purpose and a reason to the information, and try to see if other organizations have gathered that information as well. It's inevitably going to happen that there are going to be folks who, you're the sixth person asking them, what are their weekly food needs. But if you're gathering information like that, or you're gathering an estimate of damage or whatnot, see if another organization has already done that to try to help you out.
All right. So thank you so much, Tony, again. Is there any question from the participants? You could also ask directly.
I think we will take one last questions.
Yeah.
So, I would like to ask, maybe Tony or Stacy could answer. Like, we have a one region that we could not, some rescue teams still could not reach there, and which is the most affected area, but rescue team could not reach according to the country situations. So. And also, the rainy season is going to start. Like the rain focus is in today, and that area also used to affect whether rain flat, and what could be the possible diseases, because like the most of the rescue team could not go reach there. What could be the possible diseases, and what could we make sure to prevent ourselves, and the region which is surrounded by that region, what should they do according to prevent any possible diseases?
Yeah, so unfortunately, as you get the floodwaters, it's gonna flood all the contaminants also into that area. So you're gonna be exposed. Again, good sanitation practices you have no really control over because of the water is washing it down. If at all possible, again, vaccine status. I know this is tough because not everyone has access to that. Hepatitis A, again, these are all people group. So typhoid, some of your other vaccines, it's more the GI illnesses I'm worried about at this point, because if you don't have clean water to wash when you're preparing meals, when you're eating, it's very easy to transmit that from the contaminated water to your mouth. So prevention, and then when people do get sick, is to keep them separated so you don't continue the contamination. So again, the clean water, which is out of your hands, I know, is key. Vaccinating before you go, and really keeping your hands as clean as possible, especially when you're putting it anywhere near your mouth or your eyes. as my tips for that.
Thank you so much, Stacey. It's helped a lot. Is there any questions? We will take one last question. And as Tony also have to travel, and he's in the train station right now. Yes, we will share the training slide in Burmese. Very soon tomorrow. We are trying to walk as quick as we can.
I think she might time we should be wrapping up, and we should be appreciate to Tony and also the teams. Yeah.
And thank you, Tony and Stacy and Connie. I really miss Town Norwood, and whenever I get in, there's some situation in Myanmar, I got a lot of message from you, and you guys always support me wherever I request a help. Thank you so much for your support, and we will try to share as the information as much as we can from your input today. And thanks for the participant. We don't expect more than 100 people attenders, and most of the people are still messaging that they're gonna join the session due to we have the limited access to Zoom. So we will make sure to share the video recording, and as well we are going to do another session with the Burmese language, and we will also share the kids toolkits and the information that provided by Tony and Stacy very soon, which English version as well as the Burmese versions. And thank you so much, Tony, Cody, and Stacy.
Right. So on behalf of this organizing teams, I truly appreciate this kind of very hard situation. Tony, Cody, and also Stacy, and also I've also found that Chris here as well. So this information sharing session is very valuable for us, and we also have a lot of people who are going on ground as a volunteers. All these information are very needed for us as well. So we're also looking forward the resources that you could share to us as much as you can. We try to be translate, and we will share with all these people. I'm sorry about this participant limitation. We can only accommodate for 100 people for this Zoom meeting. So for the next session, we will try to be organized around 500 that we could be promised. So yeah, again, thank you so much for all the participants. If you need any kind of information, we will try to be supportive what we know everything, what we have everything. So thank you so much everyone for today meetup.
And
Good luck.
Agnes and Agent, thank you so much for your interpretation and
Yeah.
translation, and you are volunteering immediately when we asked. Thank you so much for that.
Thank you, everyone. Take care. We're here to help.
Thank you, Tony. Thank you, Cody and Stacy and August.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Please take care. Yeah.